So my show famously opens up with, "You're listening to Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew." And something occurred to me later on. I really like this interpretation of bad Jew, which is, in a post-October 7th world, there is such a thing as a good Jew. And what a good Jew is a Jew to the non-Jewish world that allows themselves to be tokenized into the anti-Zionist movement, to the pro-Palestinian movement. And a bad Jew is a Jew that is a Zionist, that is proud of their identity, that pursues and seeks their Jewish heritage, that is actually lives and breathes their identity. That's a bad Jew. It's totally opposite of what I've been saying. I guess it relates to an epiphany I learned from my most recent Israel trip, and that is that idealism is a finite resource, and your idealism needs to be focused in the right areas. And this was something that I very much mourned after October 7th. I thought I was very idealistic towards a two-state solution and towards an idea of peace. And I remember just crying, like finally just processing what had happened and crying the weekend after for the horrible atrocities that came out of October 7th. And one of the things that I mourned that day was my idealism. Mm-hmm. Because I used to be the guy that would say, yeah, I'm the pro-Palestinian Zionist. Because those two things are not mutually exclusive. And today, I don't really feel that way.
Take me back a little bit. A good Jew is somebody that is a token pro-Palestinian, and a bad Jew is a Zionist. Can you just clarify that again? Hello, friends. The following is a conversation with Chaz Volk. Chaz is the host of the Bad Jew podcast. He is an entrepreneur and just a really cool person, so I had a great conversation with him. In this conversation, we hear the story behind Chaz's Bad Jew podcast and the philosophy behind it. And then a large part of it was talking about the current Israel-Palestine conflict. Finally, we end off hearing Chaz's journey becoming a religious Jew. He started off as Reformed, and now he's working his way to becoming Modern Orthodox. The conversation was all around great, and I just want to make a caveat. In this episode, like I said, we talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Obviously, it's a very complicated issue, and I understand that people's opinions might be hot. For some of you, our opinions were too strong, and for some of you, our opinions were not strong enough. Guys, we are not professionals on the issue. We're just people talking about it from our perspective, so please be respectful of that. That being said, feel free to share your comments, and obviously nothing hateful, but the title of this episode is Are Zionists Bad Jews? For more of my thoughts on this topic, you could stay tuned to the end of the video where I will be sharing more of my thoughts in detail. One more thing I'll just say here is that I have avoided talking about this. When it comes up on the podcast, I will talk about it, but the reason why I have not really gone headfirst into this topic is because I don't want to capitalize on the conflict. I think that there are a lot of people that are in pain, and I don't want to, be that guy. Even though this topic is an important topic and find interesting to discuss and will discuss with the humility of knowing that I'm not an expert on the issue in the Middle East. But I just want to be careful of capitalizing and talking about, because there are real people suffering, and I don't want to, take a hot, controversial topic and get big off of that. And not saying that I can necessarily. Whatever. I'm rambling too long. Anyways, enjoy the episode. Chaz, welcome to the GKP. So excited to have you, man.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, of course, man. Bad Jew podcast. I love it.
I really appreciate you listening. Yeah, it's a passion project of mine. It's been something that I've, taken on with a lot of heart. I'm very passionate about it. And, ultimately it's given me a lot of the life lessons that have taken me through my Jewish journey. Thank God.
Dude, I love that. I love that so much. I'm going to pull a bad Jew move on you, man. You got 4 minutes here to tell your life story. We're going to.
Oh, okay. All right, let's do it. I'm ready.
Good.
The right of entry onto your podcast now, huh?
No, I'm just like stealing it from your show. But yeah, right, this should be fun. Ready? I'm going to start the timer. And
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Chaz Volk, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. I was born here. I grew up in a very conservative Jewish household, and what took place at time is that I was basically trained in Judaism. That sounds like a martial art at this point, the way I said it. I was taught Hebrew through Hebrew school up until my bar mitzvah, and then a little after my bar mitzvah, I kind of just fell off. And so what ended up happening was I lived through high school and through college as someone who would call himself either secular or reform. And, I went through college with a lot of amazing experiences, college was an incredible time where I learned film, but it also was a time where I was faced with a new kind of anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism wasn't new to me. I experienced a lot of it from people that actually more so associated with like white supremacy groups in middle school, believe it or not. But then when I got to college, I experienced it from the far left. And this is kind of when I started to realize that, Jews are kind of this bastard middle child, politically homeless people that kind of just fit into America somehow. And it occurred to me then that, like, as I started to form my form different ideas, that I'm actually not as left, or I'm not as reform, or I'm not as whatever I thought as possible. And so a lot of my transformation kind of started early onset then. We ended up suing my college, San Francisco State. The lawsuit ended up getting called Volk versus CSU Board of Trustees, and we won. And that was because of a case that directly confronted systemic anti-Semitism, systemic racism. And shortly after that, after post-college traveling here for 2 months, I worked in the film industry. And in the film industry, I essentially was the sound guy on different film sets, and I was the guy with the boom pole above his head. I worked with Gordon Ramsay and Terry Crews and Howie Mandel, and I worked with a lot of A-listers, which was really exciting. And a lot of them were really amazing to work with. But ultimately, what ended up happening was I ended up not falling in love with the industry as much as I thought I had. And that's because I realized that the industry is not the beautiful, starstruck image that you might have in your mind of what the film industry actually is. So instead, I ended up on my off time taking a green room that wasn't being used. And then I would take a few microphones that I had, and I started interviewing coworkers on my off time. And sooner rather than later, I learned, what I'm doing is creating a podcast. So I started this whole entire career in podcasting, thanks to the mentorship of my father, who was a huge figure in my life, who was a huge leader in my life that has inspired me in so many different ways. And that was just in time for the pandemic, because when the pandemic began, that's when I lost my day job. I was working for the Jewish Federation at the time, lost my day job. And at that point, I said to myself, okay, I'm not going to pursue any other job ever in my life ever again. I'm going to burn my ships, and I'm going to pursue this with no excuses. And I went full speed in, and I came out of the pandemic completely financially independent. And I came out of the pandemic living no longer living with my parents. And, in that time, I say that, the pandemic was an incredibly painful experience for all of us. But for me, I actually happen to look back on it very fondly, even though it was very painful for me too. I had to lose everything in order to gain everything back. And I don't regret that for a second. So I've been living in West LA since then. I've been exploring and growing in my Judaism ever since. 2 years ago, I went on the Israel trip that changed my life with Aish Litz, which is a division of Aish Los Angeles. And I learned more about Judaism in those 10 days than I had in my entire life. I'll probably be talking about that very soon. But in that time, I just learned so much about myself, and it's been a huge launch pad for me ever since.
Dude, wow, dude. I want you to continue because you just got cut off. I mean, yeah.
Where would you like me to start?
So, dude, first of all, that's so genius that you did that. That you do that on your podcast, because now I'm seeing there's so many more things that we could explore and talk about that I didn't even think to ask you about, and now it's like, wow, I'm so curious about all those things. Growing.
I appreciate it. It's a good challenge. And I took the idea from the New York Times released something a long time ago about the 36 questions to fall in love. And the 36 questions to fall in love, that's actually one of the questions that they ask there, which is tell your life story in 4 minutes.
Interesting.
So also, by the way, if you have a partner and you haven't gone through 36 questions to fall in love, it's for free. It's online. It's very accessible. You should totally check it out. If you want to fall in love today, go through that with your partner, spend a few hours working on that with your partner. I promise you, it'll change your life.
That's awesome, man. Dude, I'm feeling so much closer to you now that we.
Are you in love with me?
Dude, I'm getting this.
I'm in love with you.
Yeah. So tell me about the Bad Jew podcast. I'd like to start there. How did that start? Because I feel like we were just getting up to that before you got cut off.
Definitely, yeah. So Bad Jew started right after that Israel trip I took last time. So my third trip to Israel. When I got back home from that trip, I was very inspired. I was very moved, and I didn't want to lose the momentum of learning that I had gained. So I said to myself, okay, let's find a Jewish podcast. That's a natural thing to do. I'm the podcast guy. I have a business for podcasting. Let's find Jewish podcasts. And when I type in the word Jew, on Apple Podcasts, there were two types of results that I would find. And I liken them to these labels. The first label is the rabbi with the microphone. And there's nothing wrong with this format of podcast, by the way. But the rabbi with the microphone, as it sounds, is a rabbi who happens to repurpose a sermon or a talk they've done or a class they've done. And then they just happen to be recording it and they repurpose it into an audio format called a podcast. Mm. Okay. Again, really good content there. There's tons of wisdom to gain from that. That's not what I was looking for. On the flip side of that, I've typed in Jew on Apple Podcasts. The other common type of podcast that I would find were really just Jewish comics. And I was like, all right, well, I don't want to listen to Jewish stoners in their basement who happen to be Jewish making jokes all day. That's not what I was looking for. They're funny. It's good. Again, good content, not what I was looking for. So I ended up instead shifting towards trying to find a podcast kind of framed the way that Joe Rogan does it, where Joe Rogan in all his episodes, he's not a thought leader by any stretch of the imagination. He's a student to all the guests that come onto the show. And he's very independent. He brings on all walks of life onto the show in one place to really understand and to learn and to try to grow himself. And all his questions, you can tell, come from a place of genuinely wanting to learn and grow. Mm. And he has a fascination with people. That's what makes his show so captivating, is that you're validated as a listener because Joe is really good at putting himself in, he makes himself very accessible to be empathized with. Mm-hmm. So, and in return to validate listeners who might be on that same learning curve. So I decided, since there isn't a Jewish podcast that I could see that was out there that did that, I was going to create it. And so I had a few different names I was working on, and believe it or not, of all the people to help me, it was Kosher Dills, the Jewish rapper, who I sent him a few different options and names, and Kosher Dills right away said, yeah, Bad Jews, your best name for sure. So I went with it. And it's funny because if you look back at that episode, the first episode I ever did with Kosher Dills, if you look back at it, the green screen that I was using in my background kept on falling, but I had to play it off cool. And you can't really tell because there's the image superimposed behind me, but I'm literally holding up behind me. Like my hands are like stretched behind my back, holding this green screen, hoping it doesn't fall, trying to look professional for Kosher Dills, who's telling me about his song that just came out, DEFCON 3. And it was a whole experience. And I just had to act super professional and fake it till I make it. And at the end of the day, I knew that perfection was the killer of any dream to come true. So I just went with it. And I think if you go back and look at it, knowing what you've heard now, you'd be able to see just how fragile the set was, so to speak, but it ended up working out.
Dude, I love that. That's hilarious. I'm not familiar with Kosher Dills. How did you meet up with him and collaborate?
You know, I've met him in passing a few times. Kosher Dills is amazing. You know, he has an incredible story about overcoming addiction, and he's a rapper. And the big thing that he did, my favorite thing that he's ever done, is when Kanye West a few years ago was spewing his anti-Semitic rhetoric. You know, Kanye West said, "I'm about to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews." Something to that effect.
I remember.
It wasn't okay to say. It was not all right. You always know something's not okay if the Ku Klux Klan is rooting for you, right? Anyway, so Kosher Dills then came out with his own song called DEFCON 3. And what I find so genius about the show, about that song, is that it confronts the fact that Jews are these people that are not properly represented by either political side in the American political system. And he calls out all politicians, not just on the right, but on the left. And it's great. I think it was really well done.
That sounds brilliant. So yeah, fake it till you make it and podcasting. Like, how's that journey come for you? And like, I'm sure you're not faking it anymore. Maybe you are. Maybe you have thoughts on that.
Oh, I'm definitely still thinking it. You know, I definitely apply fake it till I make it all the time. You know, something that has become very prevalent in my work today is that, like, you know, like people have like tried to call me a thought leader before, and it's like, I'm not a thought leader by any stretch of the imagination. Just like Joe Rogan, I'm a student. If you asked me to come on and speak about anything in particular, there's very few things that I actually think I could speak on with a certain area of mastery and being an expert. The one thing I'm not going to be is someone like, you know, like there are different speakers out there that are pretty world renowned. Like I'm going to call out. Actually, I'm not going to call it anyone because that's a Shon Hara. The bottom line is there are speakers out there that some speakers speak very well on very specific topics, and other speakers, and those same speakers try to branch out to other topics that they don't speak very well on, and they're not good at it, quite frankly. And also, they don't come in with facts, and because of that, it ends up screwing them in the end. I don't want to be that guy. I'd rather be known for, a very finite area of expertise, and then be able to speak on that. So that's my goal. But in the meantime, if I can leverage my podcast to drive in success, then great. And success can mean a few things. For Bad Jew, one, it can mean me just simply learning. That's above all else. Like for me, a successful episode is, did I learn something? It's not about the quality. It's not about how many views I got. It's not about if I got it sponsored. It's about literally, did the person on the show introduce me to a new concept? Was I able to intellectually grow and emotionally grow from that experience? And, hopefully the audience gains something from that too. I have a Bad Jew WhatsApp community, and I get good feedback from from them all the time. So shout out to the Bad Jew WhatsApp community, and I'm grateful for all of them.
Dude, I love that. I mean, that's what Judaism is all about. Growing and learning, and being able to share that and be that light onto the nations and whatnot.
Amen.
Yeah. Tell me more about your goals with Bad Jew and like what the meaning behind it is for you.
Great question. So, I would like to offer the idea that right now the Jewish community is pretty fractured. Now, I would say that ever since October 7th, we've actually become a lot more united as a people. But the Jewish people are inherently fractured. And it's because of this diaspora that we experienced. And so, after we were kicked out of Israel and Jerusalem by the Romans, we were spread thin across the entire world. So much so that when people see all of our accomplishments and see all of our international stretch, they have a hard time understanding that we're only less than 1% of the entire world's population. And, it's an amazing thing to be a Jew. We have the superpower that us Jews actually have a hard time seeing. We have a really tough time seeing our own reflection. But it seems that anti-Semites notice it so well that they'll go out of their way to be imaginative about creating the most far-fetched slurs in our direction and creating the most far-fetched narratives in our direction. And I think that that's something to be to take note on as a Jew, to be proud of. It's like, hey, the more that they hate me, the better I'm doing. So that's kind of the nature of what it means to be a Jew in this world. Now, internally, where Bad Jew, the idea comes from, is the fact that Jews judge Jews really harshly, even almost more so than anti-Semites judge us. It doesn't come from a place of love. It comes from a place of fear. When an Ashkenazi Jew sees how a Sephardic Jew prays, or when a Reform Jew sees how an Orthodox Jew structures their service, or insert differences here, right? There are so many different types of Jews out there at this point that, this is, again, a direct result of the diaspora being spread thin across the entire earth. We have this snobbiness about ourselves that when we see other people, we kind of get afraid. That our gut reaction is to be afraid, and then to start, having reactions to it. What I think us Jews need to do in order to start the process of uniting, if they really believe in unity, right? If we actually truly believe in unity, which we just passed the holiday of Tisha B'Av, which is about the morning of the Second Temple. And one of the things that we always talk about in that holiday is that unity is the answer to bringing us back together and to bringing back Mashiach, right? Okay, you want unity so badly, then why aren't you asking questions to those you disagree with? Like, why aren't you going out of your way to investigate further, as opposed to a knee-jerk reaction where you say, oh, you're doing this wrong? Ask questions, learn about it, try to understand the context of it. Do I agree with everything in the other movements that I'm not a part of? No. So right now, I mean, can I even say I'm a part of any movement? I'm working towards being modern Orthodox right now. I'm fine. For the first time in my life, I'm wearing tzitzit. I'm totally in the middle of my Jewish journey. And something that has occurred to me as I grow is that there are certain things that I even have a knee-jerk reaction to that I struggle to unite with and understand with. But that doesn't give me the excuse to look at someone who calls themselves Reform or Chabad or calls themselves Breslov, calls themselves Mizrahi, Sephardic, anything that's opposite of me, and to say, you're doing it wrong. Because first of all, we're all students, and the only teacher is Hashem. And the second thing is that, again, I don't think God particularly cares about how we get there. I know that there are certain customs and halacha and rules and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I get that, of course. So yeah, there's a little bit of a how-to, but ultimately, if we really want unity, then you just have to unite. That's just common sense.
Right.
So Bad Jew is actually about making it aware to Jews that that terminology, that mindset is unacceptable, and it's going to actually harm our future existence.
Mhm.
Now, someone introduced an idea to me recently that really blew me away, and I kind of like it as well. So, my show famously opens up with, "You're listening to Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew." And something occurred to me later on from a conversation I had with a friend. It's like, I really like this interpretation of bad Jew, which is, in a post-October 7th world, there is such a thing as a good Jew. And what a good Jew is a Jew to the non-Jewish world that allows themselves to be tokenized into the anti-Zionist movement, to the pro-Palestinian movement. And a bad Jew is a Jew that is a Zionist, that is proud of their identity, that pursues and seeks their Jewish heritage, that is actually lives and breathes their identity. That's a bad Jew. So it occurred to me, like, oh, now that I like. Now that I really, really like. It's totally opposite of what I've been saying. I guess it relates to an epiphany I learned from my most recent Israel trip, and that is that idealism is a finite resource, and your idealism needs to be focused in the right areas. And this was something that I very much mourned after October 7th. I thought I was very idealistic towards a two-state solution and towards an idea of peace. And I remember just crying, like finally just processing what had happened and crying the weekend after during Shabbat, finally able to process and finally able to heal and start that healing process for the horrible atrocities that came out of October 7th. And one of the things that I mourned that day was my idealism.
Mm-hmm.
Because I used to be the guy that would say, yeah, I'm the pro-Palestinian Zionist. Because those two things are not mutually exclusive necessarily. And today, I don't really feel that way. I can't really afford to feel that way. Palestinians haven't earned that right for me and the Jewish collective to feel that way. If you want a two-state solution, then why didn't you use the resources that Israel gave you to foster peace?
Mm-hmm.
Instead, you literally shot yourself in the foot so that way you could shoot and destroy and murder so many lives on October 7th. That's not fair. You don't get to ask for your own nation now. That's not how this works. You don't just get to senselessly murder civilians because of this narrative that you've been taught since you were a child and then ask for peace.
Take me back a little bit. A good Jew is somebody that is a token pro-Palestinian, and a bad Jew is a Zionist. Can you just clarify that again?
Yeah. From the non-Jewish perspective,
Okay.
A good Jew, more specifically, because not all non-Jews are anti-Semites. So let's be more specific. From the anti-Semitic perspective, a good Jew is one that is compliant with the pro-Palestinian movement and allows themselves to be manipulated by anti-Zionist rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
And a bad Jew is the Jew that is smart. That's also, by the way, over 90% of Jews currently on earth are the ones that embrace their Jewish identity, understand that Israel needs to exist because it's our homeland, and is willing to fight for it.
So that's what you believe from the non-Jewish, like from an anti-Semitic perspective.
Yeah, and like, again, like about focusing idealism, our idealism needs to be with each other, not with creating peace with the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because our idealism, again, is a finite resource. Have idealism towards a peaceful community. Call that shalom bayit, right? Peace in the home,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we cannot afford, this is also part of shalom bayit, the principle of it. You cannot afford to share your idealism, that again is finite, with people that do not have the same beliefs and narratives as your own.
Mm-hmm.
The Torah has a label for this type of person, by the way, and that's Amalek.
Mm-hmm.
And the Torah always tells you, Hashem always tells you to fight Amalek.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. That's a very unique perspective. I mean, like, to you, have you come to any conclusions about what it means to be a good Jew or a bad Jew?
Well, if I'm looking at this internally as a Jew,
Right.
as a Zionist Jew, right? I'm just going to create two different splits here of Jews, Zionist Jews and anti-Zionist Jews. If you're in the Jewish sphere, you're actually not allowed to call yourself a good Jew or a bad Jew, in my opinion. You shouldn't be labeled as such. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. That's the only label that you should accept. Yeah, I get it. There's cultural ties to your diasporic background. I'm Ashkenazi. It was clear that my family went from Rome to somewhere in Eastern Europe, right? Then you have other people that are Mizrahi and Sephardi, and they came from Israel, and because of the Romans, they were kicked out and then pushed to other parts of the world as well. And that's why they have their diasporic background, right? But ultimately, if we went into the mindset of Kiruv, right, which is like the idea of like being closer, there's organizations that are based on Kiruv, like Ishlit was, right? Uh-huh. And we bring people in with this mindset that, it's not that I'm bringing in a Reform Jew to my Orthodox Shabbat table. It's not that I'm bringing in this totally secular Jew that eats bacon on their off time. And I'm not bringing in bad Jews to my Shabbat table so they can be good Jews. Oh. I'm just bringing in Jews to embrace Judaism. That's really all I'm doing. There's no such thing as a bad Jew looking at it from the Jewish lens. But if you're looking at us and our identity from the outside lens, there are good Jews and bad Jews. For the outside lens, if you're not Jewish and you probably hate Israel, then there is a good Jew and a bad Jew. And the bad Jews are the ones that support Israel, and the good Jews are the ones that are compliant with movements that don't actually ideologically agree with their livelihoods and existence.
So what does that mean to you? Like, it sounds like that like resonated with you for some reason. And I'm curious to understand why. Like
the concept of a bad Jew?
Yeah, from the secular perspective.
Because I think one of the most disheartening things about being a content creator online is you see other Jewish content creators, and most of them I'm very proud of. Mm-hmm. Some I'd like to just give a shout out to, like Kosher Dills, I mentioned you before. Belinda Strauss is another one I'd love to give a shout out to. I love Rabbi Raps, the TikTok Rebbe, as people call him. There are so many amazing content creators. Moriel Shviki is one that talks about modesty so well, and she's amazing. Her journey is just inspiring. There's so many people that I could point to and just say that I'm very inspired by when it comes to content creation. There's a content creator I'm not going to shout out, because if I say his name, he probably will only grow in popularity. Uh-huh. That's only going to help him. And also, it's technically Lashon Hara. But this content creator goes out of his way to literally frame him being assaulted by Jews. He has actively walked through Palestinian rallies. He wears a Jewish star openly and proudly, but he also wears it with a keffiyeh as he waves a Palestinian flag. And he tokenizes himself. He's like, yeah, I'm that Jew, and he tries to make himself like this hero. And I have no respect for him. And it actually just makes me sick. Because, Gabi, here's a joke for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. A Zionist Jew and an anti-Zionist Jew walk into an anti-Semite's bar together. And the anti-Semite's bartender shoots them both because they're both Jewish. That's my joke. How's that for a punchline?
That's pretty punchline. Yeah. You're saying that?
So,
okay.
I'm saying that this content creator, let's say the pro-Palestinian side had a chance of winning not just the war in Israel, but also just the media war, mm-hmm. which they kind of already are, by the way. Let's say they did win that war, and they actually completely toppled over the capitalist government that is America, and they turned it into a communist government. Let's say they successfully completed a complete reform in America. This content creator is still a Jew.
Yeah,
this content creator is very susceptible to being murdered just for being Jewish. And this isn't the first time we've seen this before. So it's just a shame, because this guy is just a capo, really. The capo, for those who don't know, the Jews that were volunteered to help the Nazis with their concentration camp process. So this guy really is just a capo at the end of the day.
Interesting. Chaz, I feel like I have a very different kind of like unique perspective on this.
Let's hear it.
I don't know this content creator you're referring to, and I don't know the reasons why he's doing what he's doing. It's very possible that he genuinely agrees with Palestinian cause in the sense that what Israel is doing seems wrong to him. Now, I'll tell you, like, just to share my own views. Happens to be this isn't a. I happen not to want my podcast to be political or like an Israel kind of podcast or anything. Although I have spoken about it on podcast and I will. But obviously, I'm pro-Israel and I love Israel, and I think Israel is just obviously our native land. You know, my family is from Uzbekistan, and the way they got there, even through the generations, you know, they were in different parts of the Middle East until they ended up in Uzbekistan, and then we ended up in America. So, you know, I obviously have a different perspective from Ashkenazi Jews, but my wife is Ashkenaz, you know, Polish and Hungarian and Greek, you know, from her side. So it's obviously very different, and my child's a big mix. But, you know, even in my family, Israel has always been a very important memory. And, you know, there was always been a connection to Judaism and the homeland. And it's all over the Torah, you know, about different commandments that you could only do when you're in Israel. So it's just something that's always been a part of any culture, any Jewish culture that has had, even if they're not religious, you know, it's still very culturally, the land of Israel is very important to Jews. So it's like we're native to the land. So that doesn't mean that I believe that Jewish people have you know, superior right to the homeland over Palestinians that have been living there. You know what I mean? And any disrespect or you know, lack of treating Palestinians with respect or human dignity, and obviously killing them or anything beyond that is obviously horrible and atrocious, and I don't stand by it. I do think at the end of the day, you know, Israel's attack on the Palestinians has been extremely harsh, and I'm not saying that as a judgment, like, oh, it's harsh, therefore they should stop. You know, it's been relentless, and they've been trying to take out Hamas in any way they can. I personally think, and I like to believe, just for my own like safety and sanity, because I know a lot of Israelis, I know people that are in the army, and you know, I love them. My family's in Israel. Obviously, I have a big stake, and I have a lot of family there and a lot of friends, so I care about them obviously, and I want my family and friends to be safe, of course. And of course, I believe obviously that we have a right to our homeland. Like, that's beyond any question for sure. But I can definitely understand anybody that feels that it's questionable if whether Israel is really doing the right thing based on their relentless attack. I personally like to believe that Israel is doing the right thing. I'm not a military tactician. I don't know what Israel needs to do in order to take out Hamas, but I do 100% agree that Hamas needs to be taken out 100%. You know, like it's just like the Nazis. Like, they needed to take the Nazis out of power. Like, sure, are there still neo-Nazis today? Like, yeah, but they're not in power. You know what I mean? It's like Hamas, like, yeah, sure, there'll probably always be some type of like anti-Semitic existence in the form of Hamas or some other group that will be in that area for sure, but they can't be empowered, you know, and Israel has to do whatever it can to take them out of power. So, you know, I like to believe Israel is doing the right thing. I could understand, though, somebody that thinks that Israel's not doing the right thing. And I could say, like, I get it. So, like, this content creator that you're calling out, I really don't know the reasons he's doing it. Maybe he's doing it for attention. Maybe he's doing it to pander to the anti-Semites. Maybe, I don't know. But I could also just genuinely understand, like, a Jew that feels like, okay, I feel like Israel is going too far here, even though maybe they love Israel. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, sure. Just to comment on it.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, I think something that you and I both agree on, like, yeah, like Hamas needs to be taken out, and war is harsh.
Yeah.
Okay. But I can also tell you that besides the fact that the actions are justified, is the IDF has done everything they can in a harsh war to keep civilians out of it. And by the way, you have to remember that Israel has successfully had the lowest civilian casualty to militant casualty ratio in all of urban warfare ever seen. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. That's never happened before. In almost every other war, you at least have a 5-to-1 ratio.
Right.
This has never happened in the history of modern day urban warfare. It's an accomplishment that anti-Zionists do not like to acknowledge, because it totally undermines their entire narrative about the war being genocide.
Right.
And by the way, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they're really bad at it.
No, they are.
They're really bad at it, because first of all, if you're saying that there's been a genocide happening for over 20 years, well, the population literally quadrupled in 20 years. So that's not how genocide works. Saying that there's been ethnic cleansing, that they've been literally pushed out of their land, really, is that so? So ever since, the Jews left Gaza, they literally had Jews leave their homes from Gaza in 2005. So Jews actually were ethnically cleansed by their own government, right?
Yeah. Right, no,
Like,
100%. How does be like you're preaching to the choir? Like I know these points, and I agree with these points, and like I also know Israelis, and I know their good intent. You know, Israel. Like I've been in
right,
Israel. I spent a lot of time there, and most of them will tell you that they don't have any ill will towards Palestinians, or they just want peace. You know, that's what most Israel, like on the ground that I've talked to when I went there. That's what they've told me.
sure. When
Like
when were you last there, out of
I
curiosity?
was there. I think it was 2023, so like about 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, 2 years ago, but it was before 2023.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So okay. So I think having been there, I will say that I believe that there are definitely people out there who have your beliefs. I also met people who don't have your beliefs. I met people, who have a wide range of beliefs towards the Palestinians. But ultimately, I think that one thing that was very interesting to hear is that here in America, there's oftentimes a common critique that I've been hearing among Jews, where it's like, well, Netanyahu, it has no incentive to end this war because he knows that the moment the war ends, his protection is pretty much down. He's pretty much expected to resign as soon as the war ends. And if he resigns, then he goes to jail because right before October 7th, the reason why everything took place is that he signed out with a far right coalition. And that far right coalition allowed him to be elected so that way he could avoid being put in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So inevitably, Netanyahu, if he resigns, then goes to jail for corruption, essentially, is what it is. Okay, understood. I understand. Yeah, that's pretty good incentive. But here's the other thing as well, as you just said, if we really truly believe that Hamas can no longer ever come out of Gaza ever again, then this war is in no shape to end.
Right.
It's in no shape to end. Even if you successfully created a hostage deal today,
Yeah.
the ideology that Hamas is built on still exists.
100%. Yeah.
And you can say that, yeah, we're going to put in a international police force to go in there. But like, my thought is this: who's to say that international police force is not corruptible? As far as I'm concerned, there already was an international crisis organization already around this, and that was UNRWA. But that was really just created for Palestinian refugees, and it ended up assisting the October 7th massacre.
Mm.
So there are, how can we possibly trust an international police force to come in and to handle Gaza if we've leaned on international support before and it's only disadvantaged us and only killed us en masse before? How can we possibly lean on that? So that's why we as a country, as Israel, Am Yisrael, we're not in the position to end the war yet. And so I'm actually in support of Netanyahu continuing the war.
I definitely hear that. And I feel like even for any sort of Palestinian land or territory to ever make a successful government, like Hamas they simply can't exist. Like think about it. Like they have the most sophisticated tunnel structure in the world, and yet none of their civilians are hiding in them. You know what I mean?
No.
Like that's ridiculous. No. That is not how you. It's just crazy to me. Like this is such a government that does not care about its citizens and its civilians to the point where it's like, why are there civilians still out in the public where there are bombings and shootings and everything, and like protect your civilians? They obviously just don't care. So it's crazy. But
really crazy.
These to me are like talking points that like anyone listening to this will be like, oh, you're biased or this or that, and like happens to be I agree with them. I think they're true, despite the fact that we're obviously biased.
To be fair, I'll give you a counter argument that a pro-Palestinian might say to your tunnel point that you just made, which is the counter argument to that would be, well, maybe it's because the tunnels are already full and maybe they're not as intricate as you think, right? To which you can then say to the pro-Palestinian, well, let's look back at World War II for a second. World War II, when Germany was bombing London, the civilians went to the tube, to the underground train system that London had established to stay safe from the German bombings. So under that logic, if you have, like, literally, England is the second most sophisticated tunnel system in the world. The first most sophisticated tunnel system is Gaza. So if they're even more sophisticated than the UK, then surely they should be able to house the millions of Palestinians that are there. And they don't. The only people protecting Palestinian civilians right now is the IDF. They've been making humanitarian zones. They've been creating different humanitarian passageways and whatnot. They are letting in aid into the country. Most of that aid does go into the tunnels, by the way, because you have Hamas terrorists disguised as civilians, unarmed, just passing on resources to Hamas. So yeah,
Huh.
that's how
Yeah.
it goes.
So I mean, like, nonetheless, though, I still feel like there is some type of. I'm not like I don't look at somebody that questions whether Israel is doing the right thing or not as long as they're doing it sincerely, not coming from an anti-Semitic place or anything like that.
And there's nothing wrong with being critical of the government,
Right, exactly.
But the part of the problem with anti-Zionist rhetoric is that anytime you want to criticize the government, there's only one platform to voice that, and that is the anti-Zionist world. I've always thought this, and that should be that there needs to be an international watchdog organization that represents, hey, Israel has the right to exist, but we are critical of this because insert reason here.
Uh-huh.
And, I think that actually the entire anti-Zionist movement would collapse into that. And that's why the anti-Zionist movement has no incentive to create such a platform.
Where it gets confusing is I think there are maybe such places that exist or people that come from that angle and they get pushed into this anti-Zionist camp where they're not, and or anti-Semitic camp, I should say. And
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
right. So it's like, but also by people that are pro-Zionist or whatever, like any little criticism could get interpreted as anti-Semitic, and it's like, it's just unproductive. And I feel like that's the whole mainstream political everything. Anything you do, like on one angle is like going to be pushed into, oh, you're part of these extremists, nationalists or socialists or whatever. You're poisonous. That's just what it gets pushed into. Yeah. Anyway, so how did this connect back to the Bad Jew podcast and the moral of the story here?
The moral of the story is that when it comes to being a Jew in today's world, the best thing you can do for yourself and for your people is to ask questions.
Uh-huh.
And my podcast is entirely about asking questions. If people asked each other more questions and replaced their fears with dialogue, then the world would be a better place.
I love this.
You wouldn't have a fractured diasporic community trying to understand each other in the modern state of Israel. You wouldn't have that today. You also wouldn't have haters, quite frankly, anti-Semites and racists in the world. If you're able to replace your fears with narratives and dialogues, and you're able to hear from a first-person testimonial about what it's like to be a Jew, what it's like to be a Palestinian, what it's like to be a Mizrahi Jew versus a Sephardic Jew, what it's like to be an Ashkenazi Jew, what it's like to be Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, Breslov, Chabad, what it's like to be a part of different movements, then the world would be a better place. World would know peace. You can't truly have unity if you're not asking questions. And it's going to be tough to hear different ideas that you're not used to. And that's why my podcast, we don't just interview insert movement, insert background here. We interview all walks of life. One of my favorite episodes that we did was about Jamaican Jewry. I learned from a Jamaican Jew about what the rich history of Jamaican Jews.
Interesting.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
Another amazing episode we've done episodes with Chabad people. We've done episodes with Reform people. We've done episodes with secular people. But the bottom line is that everyone, the key to peace is to understand that everyone has something to offer, no matter how different they are from you. And yet they're still a part of the same identity. Isn't that amazing?
That's
so we're all part of a family. Family is not always going to agree with each other. And we have to understand that unity has to be completed with a certain level of understanding and tolerance.
I love that. That's beautiful. Chaz, take me through your religious journey. You grew up non-Orthodox, however you put it, conservative or Reformed, and then you slowly found your way to trying to become modern Orthodox, and I'm fascinated by that.
Absolutely. Let me tell you my story about my grandma.
Yeah.
Because my grandma has a very direct and indirect impact on my Jewish journey. So my best friend growing up was my grandma. It was Grandma Lucy on my dad's side. And Grandma Lucy and I, one of our classic things to do is we'd meet up at IHOP, and I'd get my hot chocolate, and I'd get my pancakes and eggs and bacon. And after that, we'd go to the ArcLight Cinema in Sherman Oaks Galleria, and we'd go see a movie. And it was a great time. My grandma was a little uncoordinated, so I always took joy in buckling her up in my car and driving her. And we saw amazing movies together. Some of the last movies that we saw that were incredible were The Revenant, Finding Dory. We saw Whiplash together, which was cool. So we've seen all these amazing movies together. Now, what happened was in my last year of college, my grandma was dying. And she entered hospice care. And we knew her time was coming. And growing up in that conservative shul that I mentioned, my dad was almost the president of it. I'm not going to mention the shul, by the way, because it'll be easy to figure out who this rabbi is. And so I'm going to avoid that. But my dad was almost the president on the board of this shul, of the synagogue. And what took place was the rabbi, my dad asked the rabbi to come and visit my grandma on her deathbed to prepare her for Olam Haba, the world to come. And that rabbi said no. The rabbi that I grew up with, the very rabbi that did my bar mitzvah, the very rabbi that's met my grandma before, said no. And the reason why is because my dad and him got in a political feud.
Whoa.
So he let pettiness and politics get in the way.
Yikes.
And relating it back to the concept of bad Jew, he basically treated my father like a bad Jew.
I mean, he's a bad Jew, though.
No, he's not. He's a flawed Jew who made a very dumb mistake, and he's very ignorant, but he is not a bad Jew.
All right.
Remember, no such thing as bad Jews. Now, instead, my dad went to a different rabbi. And this is what rabbi I will bring up because I bring him up in admiration. He's a rabbi that has also had a direct impact on me. My dad had a relationship with the Chabad of Canyon Valley, and the rabbi was named Rabbi Moshe Brisky. Rabbi Moshe Brisky entered my grandma's apartment, and when my grandma saw with the cat dragged in, so to speak, when my grandma saw who came in, my grandma immediately said to my dad, "What are you doing? Like, why would you bring a Chabad guy? He's this long bearded, payas wearing, black hat wearing Jew. I'm not that Jewish. What are you doing?" And my dad said, he's a good friend of mine. Just trust the process. And when the rabbi and Grandma Lucy were sitting together in the room alone, my grandma defaulted to apologizing to this rabbi. And the rabbi said, "Why are you apologizing?" He says, "Because I never grew up learning my Judaism. I never grew up with anything Jewish." And the rabbi said, It's okay. Listen, your parents just immigrated from an oppressive country called Russia. And when they came to America, they wanted to assimilate. They wanted to be normal. They didn't want to be regarded as Jews. So they didn't raise you Jewish. They did away with their customs. It's okay. You did nothing wrong. He was very understanding towards stories of the diaspora. And he approached with empathy. And my grandma on her deathbed said, "Well, how can I possibly be ready to die? I don't know any prayers." And the rabbi said, "Well, let me teach you one right now. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad." Taught my grandma the Shema on her deathbed for the first time in her life. And she said it. Fast forward now to a few years later, my grandma's dead by this point. And I think around, by this point, 2022, I was making some mistakes in my life. I was definitely repeating some mistakes. And I could sense that I needed a little bit of change. And so what I did was, Ashlit, who I've mentioned before in this podcast, with Rabbi Jack and Shir Malol, some amazing people that I'd love to give a shout out on this episode. They're my huge extension of my family, if you will. They invited me on their Israel trip. But part of the requirements for this Israel trip is you had to sit with a man named Richard Horowitz. Richard Horowitz is a very, how do I put it? I mean, he's harsh. He's the kind of Orthodox Jew that will tell you as soon as you bring up one wrong thing, he'll tell you why you're wrong. I remember my first time meeting him. I sat in his office and I told him I was about to move with my girlfriend at the time, which was years earlier. And he said, "You're going to move in with your girlfriend? So you want to break up?" And I was like, "What?" And he took a fat magazine full of statistics. He slapped it on my lap and he said, "Read this." And statistics per nation, per demographic, per people, about all the couples that break up before they get married they break up because they moved in before they got married. And I was like, whoa, lay off me. I just met you. That was my first time meeting him, right? So I was expecting a very uncomfortable experience from this guy. And, Richard Horowitz in that time, because he was one of the donors of the trip, he wanted to get to know why he's taking me. So I wanted to learn my goals. And I told him, like, I want to experience Israel. Like, I just want to get connected with my roots again. I said, okay, that's good. And then he said, are you going to go to yeshiva, which is Jew school? And I said, no, I don't plan to. And he says, but because you had this conversation with me, you're now 10% more likely to. I said, I don't know if I am. He's like, actually, now you're 5% more likely. I'm like, oh, okay, Richard, sure. So on my way out, he gave me a business book because we're both entrepreneurs. Gave me a business book. He loves to give out books for free, which is pretty generous of him. And I remember always just, again, like I've had that same feeling of like, I didn't like that meeting. It just didn't feel good, but whatever. I'm on the Israel trip. It's the cost of going on this subsidized Israel trip. Let's go. Right. So now I get to Israel and we're approaching our first Shabbat, and our first Shabbat in Israel was actually in the city of Tzfat, and which is in the north. It's considered one of the holier cities in Israel. And on the way up into Tzfat, that's when I remember my friend Gabi was like, oh, Chaz, can you feel it? She's sitting next to me in the bus. I'm like, feel what? And she's like, the air feels different. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, you can feel the holiness in the air. And I was like, okay, Gabby, chill. Like, we just got to Tzfat. It's an art colony. Chill out. Okay. Like, so we get to the art colony, as I would call it. I don't think of it as an art colony anymore, but we get to Tzfat and we have a beautiful Shabbat dinner. And that night I go to bed, and I happen to be sharing a bed with another guy because the hotels are limited there. And I had a nightmare that night. I had a really bad nightmare in the morning, which was I got in a fight with the 3 most religious guys on the trip. And they kicked me out of the trip because I got in a fight with them.
Like a physical fight?
A physical fight. Like I was like wrestling and fighting with them. I was throwing punches and couldn't land a single hit, and they were hitting me back. And then
oh my God.
I got kicked out of the trip. And I got kicked out of the trip because of it. That was my dream.
I don't want to. Oh, that was the dream. Okay.
It was a dream. It was a dream. It was a dream.
Gotcha.
That's what I was saying. Is I had this nightmare, and it woke me up with a start at 6 a.m. And one of the guys that I was just fighting is now sleeping very peacefully next to me. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? That's crazy. So I tried to fall back asleep. I couldn't fall asleep. So I took my business book that Richard gave me, and I went downstairs. I figured I would just read in the lobby until everyone's awake and we'll start the day. Instead, what happened was I got downstairs and I hear my rabbi's voice, and he's in the shul downstairs. And he's actually waiting for a minyan to show up for morning shachrit service on Shabbat. And so I was like, okay, great. So I sat there, spent some time with them, tried to connect with them on what they were talking about because they were mostly speaking in Hebrew. And finally, a minyan shows up, 10 men arrive, and we can now start the service. So I'm down there, and the services begin. The Siddurim gets passed around, and I open up my Siddur, my prayer book, and I look at it, and it's just Hebrew. There's no titles. There's no English transliteration. There's no page numbers. It's just straight Hebrew. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, where do I even begin? Like, what do I even... There's no vowels either, by the way, in the letters, which I'm still a beginner, so it's like, I need those vowels. I said to Rabbi Jack, like, where do I go? Like, where do I start? I was like, oh, you Rabbi Jack goes, oh, you start here, and then you're going to bow down here, and you're going to go do this. But listen, Chaz, here's the thing. You were never trained in this. You don't need to study this right now. In fact, if anything, if you want, you can just read your business book here. You can just sit there and read it, because you just being here is a mitzvah, because you're allowing us to have a minyan. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be connected. And I'm looking at this, and I nodded my head, and I tried reading as hard as I could. And it really just felt like I was swimming upstream, having never learned to swim before. And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking to myself, this might as well be Mandarin, because I don't even know what I'm reading. And of all the people to think about in that moment, I thought about my grandma. Because I'm like, my grandma was so disconnected from her Judaism that she was learning the Shema for the first time in her deathbed. And even though I had already learned some prayers, it occurred to me in my life, with everything that had happened, that I'm as disconnected from my Judaism as my grandma was from her Judaism on her deathbed. And that broke my heart. So I waited for an 11th guy to show up so I could leave. And I left early. And I went for a walk around the city of Tzfat to like clear my head. And from multiple shuls and multiple homes, you hear these different minyans from morning shachrit service echoing back and forth around me. And I just broke down crying. It was right then that I just broke down crying. Because I was like, wow, I'm so lost. I'm so disconnected. And I remember just sitting on a bench, crying my eyes out, overlooking the Sea of Tiberias. And in that moment, that's when I decided I can't just be Jewish anymore. I have to do Jewish. I have to do Jewish right. I have to do it. I have to learn this thing. I have to pursue it. And I did. And a few years later, like after I came back, that's when I started Bad Jew. And, I guess Richard Horowitz is right about me being more likely to go to yeshiva because I just came back from yeshiva for the first time. I just came back a few weeks ago after 2.5 weeks in Israel. And it was amazing.
Wow.
I want to go back. I want to keep on learning. I want to keep on growing. It was inspiring. It was moving. It's changed my life for the better, and I'm grateful for it.
Wow, Jasmine, you're inspiring me.
Thank you.
I love that story. I feel like I was just like a little kid listening to your story, man.
Thank you. It's very sweet of you.
Of course, man. I'm curious, I want to dive into your Jewish journey a little bit more, but we're also cutting short on time. But I'm wondering, is it hard for you? Is it what kind of things are you learning that are surprising you that maybe you didn't know? Are you vibing with the community? Is there why Modern Orthodoxy? What's going on for you?
Sure. So I've always vibed with the community. In terms of why Modern Orthodoxy, it's because I've always appreciated the structure and the wholesomeness of its basis.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at Orthodoxy and the communities and what it's like to live and actually keep all the holidays and eat a certain way, it's very wholesome and it's very meaningful and it's beautiful, actually, the way that it operates. Now, as far as the difficulties and the challenges, one challenge I'm having is that the more I learn, the more I have these knee-jerk reactions to, well, I just learned this concept and I know it's right because this is what tradition is held. And now I see someone who's doing something that's in the reform style of it. And I have this knee-jerk reaction say, you're wrong. That's not how you do it. That's how you do that thing. And I'm like, but now I'm totally going against what Bad Jews about. So the more I learn, the more my ideas are challenged. The more the premise of my education is challenged. So I have to continually dive deeper to find the wisdom that works, to have the guidance that makes sense. And I know there's a way. I know there's a path. Modern Orthodoxy is a good, comfortable level for me to reach and attain right now. And I'm very proud of that. Bezrat Hashem, I get there soon. I'm currently in the process of moving out. I don't know if you've ever heard of Moishe House. Have you ever heard of Moishe House?
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it. Yeah.
Moishe House is awesome. It's a program where my rent is subsidized. In exchange, I'm supposed to host events out of my home for the Jewish community.
Sweet.
But the way that everything's framed in Moishe House is that it's very egalitarian. Anybody and everybody can come. And also, your events don't necessarily have to be Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to be for Jews. So your Shabbat can consist of not actually doing Shabbat. Mm-hmm. And I've been to a bunch of Moishe House events where the Shabbats are not actually holding any tradition of Shabbat. Other Shabbats, though, do push the envelope in a healthy way, in my opinion. I don't mind people singing at the Shabbat table and playing guitar and dancing at Shabbat tables. Mm-hmm. I think preferable if you have kosher food for sure, right? Can I be a little bit lenient at this current state that I'm at? Probably. But I'm also at the point where it's I want to grow. I'm hungry for that growth. Mm-hmm. So it's I don't want to really go to my friends' Shabbats where they're making, a cheeseburger charcuterie board Shabbat. I'm not saying that's actually what they do, but that they totally could. If you're listening and you're in Moishe House, feel free to steal that idea. But, it's not what I want anymore. I don't want that. I want the real thing. It's kind of like you can have tap water, or you can have water that comes from a glacier, like glacier melt. You can have water that is just processed and has gone to the city system, or you can have melted glacier water that's been frozen for 3,000 years and has a pure taste that's unparalleled to anything you've ever had before. That's the difference in the kind of Judaism that I'm pursuing versus what Moishe House communities offer. Yeah. And so I'm leaving. And I will say that also, it's challenged a lot of my friend circles, growing. I would say that it's been very difficult socially to continue this journey because I don't think all my friends are entirely comfortable with me, unfortunately. And that's something I have to accept. That's something I just have to swallow and understand that not all my friends are meant to last. Now, I also think that there might just be some distance for other reasons. They are either busy, or B, they're going through their own mental health crisis, whatever it is. But I can't be responsible for them. And until they prove that they're not fair with their friends, I just can't pursue it further.
Dude, that's tough, man, losing friends over this.
I don't even know if I'm losing friends over this. I think it's more so their problems. I think, Stephen Covey writes an incredible book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I think one of the bigger takeaways that I got from that book is that highly effective people successfully draw solutions from the inside out, not from the outside in. An example of an outside in approach, it's pretty common, is like, so I'm feeling angry today for some reason. So I'm going to go get an ice cream. And the ice cream is going to make me feel better. Okay. But an inside out approach is to actually go to therapy and to actually start working on anger management, and where that's coming from, why it's happening. And so that is one of the key things to Stephen Covey's book that has really impacted my life. So almost all needs of mine always come from that mindset of, okay, let's solve this. Let's actually solve this.
Wow, dude. Any surprisingly difficult things about observant Judaism that you didn't necessarily expect?
Yeah, I had to untrain a lot of the mindset I've had about ethics and morality for some time. By the way, like the moral compass of Orthodoxy in general, I think is amazing. And I want to just preface by saying that what I'm compromising for myself is the fact that as an American Jew who grew up in a very blue state, a lot of the morals that I grew up with and the values that I grew up with are very politicized, and they don't acknowledge the fuller picture. And so Torah does. Even something as old as 3,000 years is still incredibly relevant to today and how it does. And so take any subject matter and apply it to Torah. It's going to be different. It's going to actually have a middle ground than your political view and your mindset. Something I realized and learned very quickly from the Torah, based on some conversations that I had in yeshiva, was that Torah is not for this political ideology or that political ideology. It's neither right nor left. It's neither communist nor capitalist. It's kind of in the middle of everything. And people oftentimes will take it out of context for it to benefit their own political agenda. For example, years ago, I saw on Instagram a post that someone made, and granted, it's Instagram, so take it for granted here, right? That Judaism is the most progressive religion in the world because it's a pro-choice religion, talking about abortion. And I was like, oh, cool, this will be juicy. Let's read it. And so I swiped through it, like 8 slides later. I'm convinced, like, yeah, the Torah is pro-choice. Awesome. But is it? And so if you actually study the Torah and you look at what it says about abortion, like, yeah, it does say that women can get an abortion, but there are caveats. And so those caveats, if you just read those by themselves, then you would think it's a very right-wing book. But if you read the progressive aspects of it, you would think it's a very progressive book. And as you can see, it's case by case. And so with any idea, any political moral basis that you have in mind, almost all the time, the Torah says it's case by case. And to say it's one straightforward idea is politicized and doesn't do justice to the very book that you preach.
That's true, man. That's a fascinating point. And this is a whole conversation we could deep dive into, just about.
Oh yeah. It'd be controversial for sure.
I have a lot of thoughts definitely on this because it's like, I've been in YouTube for a very long time. So it's like, I feel like I understand things on a certain level that your average person doesn't.
Yeah. But, and there's probably there's so much I could probably learn from you too.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I would love to continue this conversation on your pod, but also do a part 2, Yeah.
Sure. I would love that. That'd be great.
Yeah. There were so many other topics I wanted to talk to you about, like your career in screenwriting and starting your business. And I still want to hear so much more about that. And I didn't get the chance to
That's
ask
so
you.
sweet.
Yeah, for sure, man.
And you're a great interviewer, and I want to thank you for having me on your platform. And I really hope I can come back on your podcast soon.
Of course, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But first of all, where can people find you?
People can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Bad Jew Pod. And then they can also, if they want to get in touch with me, they can email badjewpod@gmail.com. Also, if you want to be a part of our Bad Jew WhatsApp community, feel free to reach out, where it's a safe place to be Jewish, safe place to put out your your Jewish journey and to get validation for it, to ask questions for it, to ultimately grow from it, and to really just be a part and be in the know of what's happening with the show itself.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah. Chaz, if there was one thing that you would want everyone to know, right, that you could scream from the rooftops, that if everyone was listening to you, like, what would you want them to know?
Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. There is meaning behind everything, from the smallest sneeze to the greatest career achievement. Everything happens for a reason. And you're not always going to understand why these things happen. All of your prayers, all of your blessings that you ask God for, they're going to be answered, but it doesn't mean that they're all going to be achieved. And it's because Hashem, God, who wants you to grow. And if you don't believe in God, that's fine too. But the bottom line is you have to understand that everything happens for a reason. Maybe you're atheist, but you call yourself spiritual, right? Fine, so be it. Be spiritual. Be totally atheist. But understand that everything in your life happens for a reason. The reason why you're at where you're at now, the reason why you're listening to me saying this right now, is for a very specific reason. It's not up to me to decide. It's not up to you to decide, but you can figure it out. And so I implore those that are listening to think critically about everything they do and to live a more mindful life. May this mindfulness bring you success and joy. May this mindfulness bring you bring you a pleasant future. May you have a beautiful family. May you and your partner thrive. May you find love in this world, and may you know peace until the end of your life.
Man, thank you, man. Yeah. Chaz, this has been a great conversation. And I love that message in the end. And, it's funny, from one of my mentors, I deeply always had this belief, just growing up Korean, you have a belief that like everything happens for a reason. It's kind of like inbuilt in the culture. So, I used to tell this mentor, I'm like, I don't know why this thing happened to me. I don't get it. So he said to me kind of like what you're saying, like, not all the time will you know why this thing happened. And it's so funny, like this happened to me in two major instances in my life where I was like, I don't know why the heck this thing happened to me. But it's like, I just kind of accepted like, okay, fine. I don't really know why. But then it later became clear, like, okay, this led to that, good things came out of it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Anyways, just,
okay.
Yeah. Take care, man. Shabbat shalom. It's
take care.
Currently
Shabbat shalom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, friends. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Chaz. Be sure to send him some love and share your comments. I'm very curious to hear from you about what your takeaways were and your favorite part of the episode. Now, I am getting to the monologue part of this podcast where I will share some of my complicated views on the Israel-Palestine conflict and what I kind of learned from Chaz. Here's kind of what I'll say first. I think Chaz's journey is a very fascinating journey. I always find it very interesting when somebody chooses to leave their background and go to a different background to find meaning. And that honestly is, it takes strength. It takes strength, it takes humility, it takes wisdom, courage, and a certain open-mindedness that I think we all could learn from. His story about his grandmother was beautiful, and I don't know, it always just kind of, reminds me of themes of like life and death and like what are we here for and all that. And it's, I guess, getting very deep with it, but I admire Chaz's ability to take that meaningful connection and experience that he had with his grandmother and turn it into something real. And I think everyone is on their own path. I'm not necessarily saying that I think people need to become religious or not religious or anything. I think everyone is on their own unique journey, and that's such a beautiful thing. And I think the inspiration that we could take from Chaz, from his story, particularly at the end there, was that we should be open-minded, and that when we have inspiration and it calls to us, we should take action. I think that that's such a beautiful thing that Chaz said. But getting to the Israel-Palestine thing, I've genuinely, very seriously tried to avoid this topic. I've had a few guests on that were on the pro-Israel side. I've invited a few pro-Palestinian people to come on the podcast. And again, if anyone is a pro-Palestinian influencer that wants to have a conversation with me, I'm open to it. Please reach out. But I've reached out to quite a few, and I've never gotten a response. By quite a few, I mean like 3 people. I'm not going to say names, but people that were, relatively big. I don't want to have some random person to just talk about the issue. I need to have and then again, I guess that's me being hypocritical because I'm saying that I don't want to capitalize on the issue. But if I'm saying that the person needs to have an audience, then that's capitalizing on the issue. But in all seriousness, I think part of the reason is just also like a vetting process. I don't want to have some person who's going to yell at me or something or not be professional about it. So, there's obviously that angle. But getting into my opinion, and I don't think it's very straightforward. I think PBS did this incredible documentary where, I should really find out the name for you guys. It's Frontlines. I believe it's just called Frontlines, either a Year of War or Frontlines, Israel-Palestine conflict. It's something like that. But PBS documentary about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And what they did was this incredible thing where they showed the October 7th atrocities in full scale. And again, this documentary is not for the faint of heart. It's not for the weak stomach. I really had a hard time watching it, and I genuinely forced myself to go through it. And they show the brutality of the October 7th attacks, and then they go in and show the absolute brutality of Israel's response. Israel's absolute devastating response to what is going on in Gaza. I was bawling my eyes out. Literally, I was bawling my eyes out, and one scene in particular that really made me cry was just this 2-year-old girl, just kind of shaking from fear and horror after a bombing. And obviously that broke my heart because I have a daughter now, and to see anybody going through so much pain, such an innocent soul, it's hard to just say that, yeah, that's collateral damage. That's the price of war, like where are people's hearts and minds in this? I think my opinion on this is that the war needs to end as reasonably and as soon as possible. Like, I'm not a fan of war, and I think that ultimately, my opinions are complicated because I think there are a lot of moving parts. I think Hamas just simply cannot be in power. They are not freedom fighters. They're terrorists. And I think anyone that thinks otherwise is, I don't know. I think it's either ignorance or anti-Semitism or something else. I genuinely don't know. Now, I think I do hear the counter argument of like, what do you expect Palestinians to do when they are in such, when they are, oppressed so much? Obviously, there will be freedom fighters that will rise to try and free the Palestinians. And honestly, I hear that argument to a certain extent. I do hear the argument to a certain extent. I don't know the answer to that. I genuinely don't. But I think that the answer is not terrorist attacks. I think the answer is not going into a concert and murdering innocent civilians and their family. Like, we're not talking about going into an army base and ambushing an army base or something. We're talking about the murder and capture of innocent civilians, which is absolutely unacceptable. And I think that Hamas has hate in their bones. I don't think that it's a freedom thing. And, whatever. I'm not an expert on it. Maybe somebody will say that I'm wrong about this, and that's okay. You have the right to your opinion, but murdering innocent civilians is not acceptable on any side of the aisle. And another point about why Hamas is terrible for the people is because if you think about it, if what they're saying is true about Hamas's ultra-sophisticated tunnel structure, why are the civilians not hiding in the tunnel structure? Obviously, I think Hamas it needs to be taken out. And that's another reason why I don't buy the Hamas freedom fighters argument. I think if they were genuinely caring about the people and the freedom of the Palestinians, they would not be treating their own civilians in the manner that they treat them. And look, it's like, I've never been to Gaza. I've been near Gaza. I've never been in Gaza. But I've been in the West Bank, and I've been in Israel. And through talking to most of the people that I got to talk to, Arabs and Jews alike, most of the people really just wanted peace. I worked in a camp in the summer that had a lot of Israeli kids. I was doing a solid for one of my friends, and I was in the camp Rabbi, funny enough. But basically, I would ask a lot of the Israeli kids what they felt about the war going on in Gaza, and most of them were like, it's really terrible, and we don't want war. We just want peace. We just want it to end. And I get it. I have good faith in Israel, and a lot of people question that faith, and they don't necessarily have to give Israel the good faith. But I've actually been there. I've been to Israel and I've spoken to the Israelis. I have friends that are Israeli and family that are Israeli. So it's like I believe in their good faith. I know they're good faith. They're not trying to, at least the people do not want a genocide. Now look, like there's obviously a lot of questions going on about the government, about like what are the government's intentions. I assume to the degree that the government represents Israelis, the government also does not want a genocide. So here is the bottom line from me as a person that is not an expert on the Middle East. I think that the targeted death of innocent civilians is always unacceptable to the degree that Israel is doing it. I know that there's a lot of debate on this topic, and I'm not saying that Israel is willingly and intentionally targeting civilians. Genuinely, I do not believe so because, like I said, I believe in the good faith. But if that is obviously going on, I obviously think it's terrible. I obviously think Hamas is terrible as well. They have targeted innocent civilians and clearly don't care about their own population. So it's sad. It's tragic. I don't know what the right course of action is. I have like theories and speculation, but that's what it is. Another thing that I'll say that I think is controversial, but I don't see why it is. I believe in the free rights of all people to live wherever they want to live. I think that Jews should be allowed to live in the West Bank and Gaza, and I believe that and anywhere in the Middle East, or anywhere in the world for that matter, Jews should be allowed to live everywhere. And the Palestinians should be allowed to live everywhere as well, obviously. And everybody should be allowed to live with full human rights and decency and dignity and with respect. And like any time that that's violated, I think that that's horrible. And what I see a lot of is, maybe like aside for, those are my opinions on the Middle East topic. And now maybe I'll say some opinions about what I think about other people's opinions. I think that there's a lot of gaslighting and minimization on both sides of the aisle. I think that there are people that will somehow say, oh, October 7th actually was committed by Israel itself because there was a Hannibal elective, blah, blah, blah. I think, honestly, if you believe that most of the atrocities that, Hamas committed were actually fake and staged on October 7th, I honestly think that you should probably, whatever. I think it's a conspiracy theory, and I don't want to say, like, people that are conspiracy theorists should go to a mental hospital. I don't believe that, per se. Sometimes obviously if somebody's extremely delusional, then they probably should go to a mental hospital, but that's what it is. It's a delusion, and it's false, and it's not true. Everything aside, Hamas has definitely committed a terrible, atrocious atrocity that justifies a full-scale launch war against Hamas from Israel. Like, that is absolutely undeniable. And I think that the gaslighting of that, of minimizing the atrocities of October 7th, like I hear people saying like, oh, the rapes didn't actually happen. It's like, what's your point? People were innocent, like innocent civilians were murdered, right? Like I think very often people say like, oh, the rapes didn't happen, the beheading babies didn't happen. It's like, it doesn't mean anything because still innocent people were murdered and killed in their homes and kidnapped. Like to me, the absurdity of gaslighting the atrocities of October 7th, it's like, what are you trying to accomplish exactly? It doesn't accomplish what you think it's going to accomplish. You might as well see the point. Like, it genuinely doesn't make sense. It's like, I don't get why anybody would argue that the atrocities to the scale that it happened did not happen. I think, like, it's just insensitive to the people that went through the tragedies. And then I think also on the other side, I think just saying, oh, all these innocent civilians, children, deserve to die and have their infrastructure completely demolished just because of what Hamas did on October 7th, I think that that's also gaslighting and not really fully accepting the atrocities of what's actually happening. People say, like, oh, that's war, that sucks. I really just have a hard time buying that. And I guess like what I'm saying is like everyone's wrong. Another thing that I see is obviously I don't believe that if you are a Zionist, then you're a bad Jew. I think if you're a Zionist, you're probably a good Jew. If you're not a Zionist, I think you're also probably a good Jew. I think it's not very clear morally. I think a lot of people have a very clear moral position on it, and I don't criticize anyone for that view. Everyone has the right to their view, whether that's pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I mean, I guess you do have the right to an anti-Semitic view, but I don't believe that you should have an anti-Semitic view, and I think that having one is very evil. And obviously, I think that there are a lot of people in this that have an opinion on this conflict, that are vocal about this conflict even, that have a very anti-Semitic view. And it's horrible. It's genuinely horrible. People that are like Holocaust deniers and think that Israel deserves this because they're somehow behind every terrible thing that's ever happened, like 9/11 and Jeffrey Epstein and whatever else people want to blame Jews in Israel for. I think it's genuinely crazy. You have pretty crazy conspiracy theories. Like I was watching Dan Bilzerian, this clown, on Piers Morgan. And look, I don't like calling people clowns or calling people out by names, but he honestly was a clown, especially on that interview. And listen, Dan, I mean, if you're listening to this and you want to come on my podcast to discuss it with me, I'm open to it. But genuinely, I think that his views were very anti-Semitic and extremely dangerous because, he's just basically spewing anti-Semitism. Like, he basically blamed communism on the Jews, which is Nazi propaganda. There may have been Jewish intellectuals that were, that have theorized communism, and a minority of the government, like, I think under 10% were Jewish at the time even. And then not only that, Jews suffered indiscriminately from communism. So it's kind of crazy that he blamed the Jews for communism, which is obviously a Nazi talking point for anyone that knows their history. He blamed Jews on the Armenian genocide, which is kind of crazy, instead of blaming the Ottoman Empire. It's just kind of very blood libel-y, anti-Semitic, and very much not thought out, kind of very stupid tribal mentality. And I'm very disappointed in Dan, very disappointed in the comment section in Piers Morgan's video. And typically I'm not the type of person to think like everyone hates the Jews, but after watching that and then seeing the comment section, it really makes you think like, yeah, there are a lot more anti-Semites out there. But then again, everyone's hiding behind their anonymity, and it is what it is. That's probably about it. I think anti-Semitism is bad. I think killing of innocent people is bad. And we just need to bring world peace somehow. Which brings me to my final thing. Everyone, guys, stay curious. Think for yourself. You're more capable than you think you are. And to the rebellion.